Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nobody, and I know nothing. I'm gonna talk about something I find rather interesting, which is the concept of time and time travel and how it's relative. I think there was a movie that sort of played with the time theory where the relativity of time is determined by what it's being referenced to, where they're on a spaceship and the travel was like 5 years. I'm making that up, but basically it was like 5 years travel in space, but back home it was like 25 years. I think it was called Interstellar. Let me check that. See, Interstellar. The movie. Let's see. Here's the plot. An ex-NASA pilot starts doing things. Passes through a wormhole. Only to flies through it, only to find out decades have passed due to a time slippage. Okay, so I had the premise. So the movie is Interstellar, and it's interesting because time is most definitely a thing, but I would say there's no actual concrete way to define what time is. We just say what time is so it's easier to work with it. For example, like plants grow at different rates, so if you don't have one hard and fast rule for what time is, would you hold, like, say, how fast a pine grows? If it can grow, like, say, 20 feet in 5 years vertically, to an oak, which would take, like, 30 years to grow that tall? Like, would we prefer to run off oak time or pine time? We can't really go off the seasons because the seasons are shifting currently. I would say from 5 years ago to now, the seasons have shifted approximately 1 month, where winter lasts a smidgen longer, summer lasts a smidgen longer, fall and spring don't really exist, and they kind of appear sporadically throughout winter and summer. Fall is still kind of a thing, but spring is definitely a bit missing nowadays. And it's been interesting to note that difference, being as someone who works outside. So you can't go basing time off the seasons because that's inconsistent. Our current model is essentially running off a day, but the days aren't that consistent. So we chose to a method of keeping track from there by deciding a set amount. How to describe this without using the word time? A set amount of time to determine time. I'm going to use the word I'm trying to define in the definition. That's never a good thing. So we chose segmented intervals at a predetermined amount to determine what time was, and then we decided a series of those intervals is another thing, and then a series of those things turn into another, so on and so forth, i.e. seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years. And then years get broken up into centuries, millennia, eons. And so that makes more sense because then because that's how we get to the definition of an oak takes 30 years to grow the same height as a pine tree that grows X height in, let's say, 5 years. It makes it easier to define things by creating a standard. But that's because of how we perceive time. Could we change the way we perceive time? Or is the way we perceive time set? Is it possible that we can perceive time slower or even faster? Or is the way time is perceived based on how long something lives? Of course, that requires some degree of self-consciousness, But tossing that aside, let's see, what was it? It's the Californian Redwood. Californian, Californian Redwood. It's one word. I'll make it two though. Let's see. That particular tree, the coast redwood. There we go. Sequoia sempervirens. It's a fun word. A tree that can live up to 2,200 years. If a tree could perceive time, and it could live up to, let's just call it 2,000 years, because that's a nice round number. If a tree were conscious in the way we're conscious, assuming it's not conscious, how would it perceive time? Would it perceive time differently because it can live longer? Does a mouse who's got a very short lifespan, let's see what the average lifespan of a mouse is. Average lifespan of a mouse. Let's see, 5 to 7 years on average. So let's say a mouse lives 6 years. Does a mouse perceive time as flowing faster because it lives for a shorter period of time, or does it perceive time the same way? If a mouse cared to perceive time, do you need to care to perceive time? Do you need to care to judge things by time? Wait, why is time relevant outside of defining things? Was time an important concept to hunter-gatherers outside of the general knowledge of seasons? When did humans care about the precision of time before it became relevant to describing, say, the average time to yield a crop? Did it become more important as we became more agricultural based, when we started keeping livestock and growing plants and harvesting them? Did we shift from a perceived time of just seasons, where it's starting to become colder, which means I need to move to a place where I know it's not as cold, because that's where the things I want I know are still growing, because I wasn't there, and whenever I go there, they'll be about ready or will be ready. Because it's getting cold here and I know it's not cold somewhere else. Did that change? Did we start caring about time when we started becoming more agriculturally based societies, or agricultural based societies? Because then it would have been a matter of, it takes a period of time to plow and till a field. It takes time, an X amount of time to plant the seeds. You need X amount of time for it to grow and reach maturity. Then you need X amount of time to harvest, and it can only be stored for a certain amount of time before it rots. Did time only become significant once we became a more agricultural-based society? When we wanted to keep track of the gestation periods of animals for breeding and milking purposes? When did we decide too young of an animal was too young to slaughter, but at a certain age it was old enough to be slaughtered? Where was that line drawn? Why was that line drawn? When was that time selected? Is that when time became significant? Is that when it became more important to break it down into standardized increments past just a day being day and night? The difference between a day just being when the sun set and the sun rose. Then we became more interested in the incrementations of time. And did the incrementation of time indirectly propel us to investigate everything else with greater detail? How many things is time relevant to, scientifically speaking? It's important in physics, chemistry. Math doesn't count because it's the language the sciences uses. Geology, so it's at times important, but it's a little vague. Archaeology, times important. Why does it feel like the sciences grew when time became relevant? Was the interest in time that which propelled more accurate and more precise science, broadly speaking? Well, I certainly don't know, but it's interesting to think about. So, now that we've gone on that lovely long tangent, time travel, which currently, time travel, according to Einstein's theory of relativity, time travel can only be achieved when you exceed the speed of light, which matter cannot exceed the speed of light. So you'd have to find a way. Personally, I think reality bending is how you get past how you get past faster than light travel or getting past the speed of light. And you do that through gravity. Gravity, the phenomenon that we know is a thing but don't really know what it is. We know what it does and how it acts, but not how it comes to be. We know that certain things are required for it to appear, but so we know everything has a gravitational field. Everything that has mass has gravity in varying degrees. So is it possible to build something with gravity? Can you create gravity strong enough to bend light and reality without having a supernova star or some sort of large planet type, I guess, thing? I don't have a better word for it. I don't have a better word for it. So is there a way to generate gravity in a measurable way that does not require an excessive amount of mass? That'd be interesting. If you can bend gravity, you can negate gravity, and then you can use the gravity manipulation to bend space around you. And in essence, you could theoretically bypass the speed of light and, in essence, either teleport or time travel. The problem I personally have with time travel is the concept of time. So time's relative according to Einstein's theory of relativity. So if you were to travel backwards in time, what would you require? What would change? Does traveling backwards in time, say using gravity manipulation, could you do that in such a way where let's say you move backwards in time, but is your position fixed as you move backwards in time? That's what I'm curious about. Because the problem is everything's moving. Earth's moving, the solar system's moving, and space itself is moving. So space is ever expanding, and we're in a galaxy that's hurtling through an ever expanding space. And then within the galaxy, you have our solar system, which is also moving as separate within the galaxy. And then within the solar system, you have Earth moving. So if you were to move back in time, does the relevancy of time affect location as you move backwards within it? How do you accommodate for if you were to go back in time, but you didn't move? Let's say you went back in time 5 years, but where you went back in time didn't change. So you're actually in the location where Earth will be in 5 years, but now Earth is 5 years behind you. Or if you went back, say, a day, how far back in time would you have to go where you would do it so wrong you would come crashing back down to Earth? Say you move back in time, your location as the traveler through time, you're in a fixed location, but Earth isn't. So let's say you went back in time 4 hours. Would that be enough time where your position would shift and you would be at the outer edges of the Earth's atmosphere and then come crashing in and die? Or whenever you travel back in time, since time's relative, are you traveling backwards with everything else? Can you travel back relatively with what you want to travel back in time with? If you were to time travel, do you have to reverse? If you were to go backwards in time, would everything else relatively have to go backwards in time? So if you went back 15 years, is that to say not that you went back 15 years, but you actually didn't, but everything else did? Oh, that's interesting. So if you were to go forwards, you would be positionally locked, but everything else would continue to move forwards. Would it be something like falling asleep in a car while you're traveling some long distance away where you fall asleep in the beginning and you wake up and you're there? Time has passed, but your location has changed. Could it be similar where as you go through time, you're fixed and everything else isn't? Well, I officially don't know what to do with this information. I went ahead and rambled on pretty long for this one, so I'll go ahead and end it here. Until next time, friends, have fun, stay safe, and don't talk to bears.